Hello, it's Laura from Ukraine, Heart of Ukraine Ministries. It's really late and I wanted to get a video out to you just to catch you up on things that are going on. LuLu, our pig, was due on March 31st with Piglets, but she decided to come early. Mark got up to use the bathroom, heard the ruckus out in the barn at 3 in the morning, woke me up when he saw that a piglet had been born. So I spent over 8 hours in the barn with LuLu. She had a kind of a difficult delivery, and she delivered 10 piglets, but the last one, it took 2 hours to deliver, and he was kind of big, and he just didn't make it. So we've got 9 healthy piglets doing very well. Put them in to feed with her after she had delivered her placentas, and it was more of them just kind of searching around, not really getting a lot to drink. Waited an hour or two and put them back in there. They did a little bit of drinking. A third time was much better. They were learning how to suckle and got a good meal. Fourth time we went to do it, LuLu was extremely aggressive with me and with the piglets, and she tried to bite at them seriously several times. And so I remembered that we had this situation many years ago with one other pig, and she had a very difficult delivery as well, and I guess it just gets the hormones raging, and so she just had all these hormones flooding through her. So I ended up feeding by hand with a big syringe the piglets for several times, and they get fed every 3 hours for the first day or two. So I was up and down feeding them, trying to catch some sleep here and there. Finally, we also gave her a shot, not quite a tranquilizer, but something very similar, and then a couple hours later gave her a second shot, and that definitely helped start to calm her down, but it still took probably a day and a half for her to get calmed down, and I just continued to kind of pet her, and that kind of helped me gauge how receptive she was to me and how receptive she might be to the piglets. So only when I knew that she was really calmed down and she presented herself for feeding did I even think about putting the piglets back in there with her, because the pig that we had years ago that had the same situation ended up killing a couple of her piglets, throwing them around, biting them, those kind of things. We didn't want that to happen again. So sacrificed my sleep and Mark's sleep and fed the piglets. One night I went out, it was about 2 in the morning, I think was one of the feedings, and she was presenting herself and I wasn't prepared for it. So I had to run and get some warm water and a rag, and by that time the moment had passed. So I was ready for her at 6 o'clock in the morning when she presented herself. And the piglets did pretty good. There was one, the runt, I had to still hand feed, and 1 or 2 that just kind of supplement a little bit. And we did this for 2 or 3 different times, and finally the runt was starting to learn how to suckle, and they're all doing really, really good now. Initially she was laying on just one side, but now she's learning to lay on one side and then on the other side. She's also learning how to present her belly where all the teats are available, because she has 7 and then 7, and we have 9 piglets. So we kind of had to rotate them in and out at first, and then she was kind of learning how to present herself really well for them. So she's doing really good. She's a really sweet pig, and she's back to her old self again. We did have a slight situation tonight when we had already put the piglets in to be fed, and I was feeding the big pigs and cleaning their pens, and I was cleaning her pen, and Miss Piggy, whose pen is kind of right behind, was chewing. Sometimes they chew on the metal slats of their pens, and she got her teeth caught, and so she let out a screech, and it got all the pigs going, and I saw Mama Pig immediately, kind of block between me and the piglet box. And so I shut the gate really quick, and all the pigs were all upset for quite a while, and I had to kind of hit the bottom of her lip to kind of press back to get the little tusks out of it. I'm not sure how she does it. how she did it, but a lot of the pigs kind of mouth their pins, when they're excited, especially when food is coming, and then I had to push up on her upper mouth, and she finally got out of there, and she was a little bit shaken, and like I said, the rest of the pigs were kind of upset. They finally got them calmed down, and I was able to clean all the pins, and then I had a sister's call. Two of my sisters flew to the location of my third sister, and they called me, and we talked for probably an hour and a half, just really enjoying each other. They were asking a lot of questions about what's going on here, and when we get done with that, Mark and Natasha jumped up and did all the dishes because we had to dismiss Peter today. Just the men that we deal with sometimes can be extremely difficult. And we have a couple of sayings in rehab. One of them is stuck on stupid. And Peter just didn't want to let go of some of the stupidity of his old life and try and do something new and let go of his own understanding. And we just had several situations right in a row. He had talked about leaving on Sunday to go to the office to work on his pension, the prison office, even after Pastor Sergey had checked on it, Anatoly from the prison ministry had checked on it. We have all told him several times the offices are closed because of the war. And as soon as they're open, we would let him know and get the documents taken care of. But he just is dead set on going to do it himself. So he's going to find that the offices are closed on Monday, but he was going to leave on Sunday, and we just decided today it was time for him to go. And sometimes one of the most difficult things that we have to do in rehabilitation is help men feel the full effect of the consequences for their choices. Because many times when you have someone with an addiction, the family around them is actually addicted to the addict. It's called codependency, and oftentimes rush in and saves the addict from their situations. And when you save them, they don't learn from the consequences. And you are also jumping into the situation and preventing God from working, because God is allowing a situation. He's allowing the circumstances because he wants to put pressure on the person and to help them change. And when we jump in and save them, we are cheating them from God working in their lives, but we're also helping them to continue to be an addict because they don't have the problem. When we save them, we have the problem. So part of this process that we have at the Rehabilitation Center is helping them feel the consequences of their choices. And so we have been doing that with him, and it just wasn't working. And so we kind of have to raise the bar. And so today we just said enough is enough. We're throwing our pearls before swine, kind of. We're investing, and there's a willful rebellion and disobedience in the process. So anyway, I went out to feed the rabbits, and Mark and Natasha did all the dishes. And then I came back and kind of cleaned up the big room while they finished up the dishes, and then we've all kind of finished our chores, and Mark's headed to bed. Natasha's on a prayer call that she does with some other ladies, and I thought I'd sit down and do a quick video with you, although I'm not sure it's going to be so quick. So Piglets are doing well. Our 2 litters of baby rabbits are doing well. Our 20 chickens from the incubator are doing well and growing really, really fast. They were a little tiny, and now they're getting to be here. We've been acclimating them to the weather a little bit more, and eventually we'll be putting them in the enclosed coop on the back side of the barn, where we can separate them from the other chickens, but they can get used to each other. And once they're big enough to kind of run away and fend for themselves, we'll put them out with the rest of the flock. Turkey duck is sitting on eggs, and a goose is sitting on eggs. And we have these kind of little cages that go up against the nesting box. And that helps them feel safe, but also when the chicks are hatched, the other birds don't peck them or harass them. We continue to feed. Mark and some of the refugee men, we're going to go out and burn the corn that's in our cornfield. but we've had several days of rain and quite a bit of rain today, so they didn't do that. So it's going to be put off till next week sometime. Tomorrow, Natasha and I are meeting up with the mayor of our village, and we are going to visit all the different houses that have refugees in our village and just kind of check on them and see what they need. We've got a couple food bags prepared, and we're also going to be taking some pillows and sheets and blankets and things like that just in case somebody needs it. But we'll be talking to them about what they do need, how we can help, and just build a relationship with them and give them our ear, as they talk about what they've experienced. Like the one family we've had a lot of contact with showed us pictures of the shrapnel that went through their walls and their windows, and a video of the explosions that were close by from the different rockets and missiles, and broken windows and those kind of things. Just helping them to express and share a lot of that trauma and to work through the grief. So that's what we're going to be doing. So please pray for us tomorrow as we go do that and we start the relationship with a number of people here. So in the news, I've got a number of things. I'll just try and skim over them. The fighters of the Islamic Battalion in Crimea, because the Kazakhs, which are Muslim down in Crimea, are being persecuted dramatically by the Russians, and this Islamic Battalion cleared the forest from Russian troops in the Kiev region, kind of between there and Zhytomyr, and they collected a lot of supplies or trophies that the Russians left behind. The United Nations says it has been able to obtain evidence that Russia has used illegal weapons in human settlements in Ukraine at least 24 different times. The organization is also investigating the possible use of banned weapons and ammunition by the Ukrainian side, because that's what Russia is claiming, although there has been no evidence so far of that. But they have to, investigate both sides. So my little stand that holds my cell phone is broken, and it's kind of, Mark put some rubber cement on it, and it's fixing it. So that's why I'm kind of looking over to the side to look at my notes. About 9 o'clock in the morning on March 31st in Ukraine, a minute of silence was held, and they're doing that every day here at 9 o'clock in the morning, just in memory of those who have died because of the hostilities and the invasion of Russia. Despite the statement of the release of Irpin, which is a town very near or just on the outskirts of the suburbs of Kiev, the bodies of the dead are beginning to be taken out, even though the Russians were still firing on them. And Ukraine has really worked hard to gather the dead bodies, to take pictures of them. They have a website that Russian families can look at to see if their sons have been captured or if they've been killed, but also for the Ukrainian people, the civilians, and keeping track of the Ukrainian military that has died. They've also, as they've been clearing this area, the Ukrainian army, they've been looking for mines and explosives that may have been left behind by the Russians. And there's some, not a lot, but there has been some. In Lysychansk, again, I need to really write these in Ukrainian so I can read them better. Russian troops fired on an oil depot, and Severodonetsk on a school. And some people were killed, including 2 children, after they tried to treat them because they were in critical condition. Several injured and dead bodies couldn't be picked up from the streets for hours. They just laid out there because of the fighting. In England, the Ministry of Defense has published its daily summary of the situation in Ukraine, and the agency reported the continuation of significant shelling in Chernihiv, which is north of Kiev, and one of our refugee families here is from there, despite the statements by the Russian Federation that's saying they're reducing their activity in this area. They say it, but they're not doing it. The agency expects heavy fighting in the Kiev region and in the suburbs of the capital where Russian forces remained in position, and also reports on the continuation of fighting for Mariupol. Since then, we have learned that a number of those troops have been pulled back or they say they've been pulled back, but Ukraine has beat them in a number of battles and are taking back a lot of those towns in the suburbs. In the Zaporozhye region, Russian authorities took control of the website of a city council there, and the website of the city council has been publishing information in Russian since March 29th, not in Ukrainian. And the report on the distribution of humanitarian aid contains threats for anyone voicing political slogans and expressing their position against Russia or against what they're doing. So they're already starting to crack down and persecute people who don't go along with their agenda. All the principals of the schools in the temporarily occupied Melitopol wrote letters of resignation, the mayor reported. And this is the town where one of our ex-graduated clients is from, and he's got family there, and they're going to try and get out on one of the green corridors. But the teachers did this in protest against the Russians. They're unwilling to cooperate with them and resign from their positions. The former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, wrote, "It's barbaric how Putin kills civilians in Ukraine, including ethnic Russians." Now, he was supposed to be coming here to protect the ethnic Russians from the Nazis, but he's killing them as well as all the other Ukrainians. And it's even more shocking how little he cares about the lives of his own Russian soldiers, because many of them are being treated better by the Ukrainian army as a POW than they were in the Russian army of their own army. Anyway, he goes on to say that Putin's tactics in Ukraine underscore his indifference to human life, including his own citizens. And then he went on to say Putin is not making some magnanimous, I can't say that word, sorry, decisions to withdraw, to start peace negotiation. His soldiers are retreating because they are losing to Ukrainian forces. They're not choosing to retreat. They're being forced to retreat. That, I think, is some good news in terms of the heroic, ferocious fighting we've seen from the Ukrainian military in this war so far. So, again, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia. 4:56 that morning, Britain was starting to see the early indications of Russian troops in Ukraine that were retreating from Kiev, I guess as they looked down from satellites and some of those kind of things. The Ukrainian army is attacking the enemy during the retreat and making it very difficult for them. The coming weeks are going to be very difficult for Ukraine, but in many ways, the head of the Russian Federation has already lost, even though there's still a lot of fighting. Putin has hurt himself because of a series of catastrophic mistakes. And they're saying, a lot are believing that the leaders around Putin are not really telling him the truth because they're afraid. In Russia, you may have heard in the news that an oil depot caught fire in Belgorod. This was announced by the governor of that region. There was no information initially if this was because of military actions or sabotage. Earlier, an ammunition depot exploded in the Belgorod region as well. 2 people were injured in the fire at the oil depot. Residents of the 3 nearest streets were evacuated because it was getting so big. They still don't know what started the fire. Some of the local residents claim that they have a video of an airstrike on the oil depot, but Ukraine says that they didn't fire anything, from what I understand. The 6 o'clock briefing by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on April 1st says that there's a continuation of the partial withdrawal of Russian troops from the north of the Kiev region towards the state border of the Republic of Belarus. The columns also include civilian vehicles that were stolen by the Russian soldiers during the temporary occupation of the territories. In addition, the Army of the Russian Federation is exporting property that has been looted. And I've seen pictures of Russian soldiers that were killed during the fighting, and when they were looking for identification on the soldier so that they could let their family know, they found all sorts of jewelry and money and all sorts of things like that they have stolen. In the temporarily occupied territories, the Russian troops continue their illegal actions, restricting the movement of the civilian population, using houses and apartments of local residents to accommodate their own personnel, holding local residents and activists hostage, looting and committing violence against Ukrainian citizens and taking a lot of them as POWs and even returning them to Russia or taking them to Russia. In some areas that are temporarily occupied, Russian soldiers are trying to force entrepreneurs to switch to paying for goods and services in Russian rubles instead of Ukrainian hryvnia. The grouping of the joint forces of Ukraine and the Donetsk and Lugansk directions pushed back 7 Russian attacks during the day. Ukrainian soldiers destroyed 3 tanks, 2 armored personnel carriers, 2 vehicles, 2 artillery systems, and a UAV of the Orlan 10 type was also shot down. The British edition of the Times wrote that Mariupol is on the verge of falling. The siege of Mariupol draws to a bloody conclusion as Russian forces prepare for a final assault on the besieged port along the Sea of Azov. The U.S. military analysts have said that the city is likely to fall within days. But both the U.S. Pentagon and the British military sorely overestimated Russia's forces and capabilities and underestimated Ukraine's. So how much do we really believe in this situation? The fighters there in Mariupol, Ukrainian fighters, say, we're not giving up. We're going to fight tooth and nail. Residents in the village of Novobasin in the Chernihiv region, again, that's north of Kiev. I watched a video as the Ukrainian soldiers came into the village, and the people were saying, we've been waiting for you, please come and have dinner. They were giving them food, they were cheering, they were shaking their hands, praising them, and you could just see how relieved they were to have Ukrainian soldiers in their village and taking it back for Ukraine. About 300 Syrian mercenaries arrived in Russia to fight against Ukraine. Kind of wondering about what a mere 300 is going to do, but and they're going to be shocked because the type of fighting here is much different than what they would be doing back there in Syria. So they may not be as good or prepared as they think they are. We'll see how that goes. April 1st, Microsoft will not completely leave the Russian market, and a lot of corporations in Ukraine are saying they're going to not use Microsoft products. We'll see how that goes. In the morning, Russians attacked a residential sector of Gorny with multiple rocket launchers. There are several destroyed houses. A woman was wounded, and this was reported by the Lugansk Regional Military Administration on the Ukrainian side. Again, the British Ministry of Defense published its daily summary of the situation. The agency reported a successful limited arms forces of Ukraine counterattacks east and northeast of Kiev, as well as liberation of Sloboda and Lukashovka, villages that are in the south of Chernihiv area. According to the ministry, despite the statement of the Russian Federation about a decrease in activity in Kiev and the Chernihiv directions, Chernihiv and Kiev continue to be under constant bombardment from the air and missile attacks by Russia. Some great news, though. Igor, the mayor of Brovary, a Kiev region, confirms that Russian troops have left the entire region. Invaders left almost this entire area, and he talks about the direction that they went. The armed forces of Ukraine is clearing the settlement from the occupiers, going from house to house, destroying equipment, and taking care of any mines that were placed. Also, the head of the Chernihiv Regional Military Administration reported that the Russian troops are leaving the Chernihiv region. All communities are working to restore a regular life. The armed forces of Ukraine are engaged again in demining the settlements where the Russian army was stationed, so the mines they set up. Urban-type settlement of Ivankiv was liberated from Russian troops as well. The settlement is controlled by the Ukrainian army now. This was reported by a journalist who is from that area and had stayed in that area under the occupation. And it was some of the first few days that it was occupied. There was a long time that there was no mobile communication or the internet, so they couldn't even use their cell phones. oil depot that was blown up continues to have a grouping of firefighters. They're trying to put foam on it and put it out. There was almost 200 firefighters there working on that. And due to the events in Belgorod, all law enforcement agencies in the Chores region have been put on high alert. A IT battalion has been created in Kiev. Basically, it supports and protects the necessary services in Kiev from cyber attacks, organizes the interaction of critical enterprises, and adapts the app, which is called Kiev Digital, to wartime conditions. And one of the things that Ukraine has done really well is use social media to get the word out to citizens. I follow one of those so that I know when there's air raid alerts in our area, and some of the information I'm sharing with you right now is from that site. So they've done really well at this communication. The Azov Battalion, because it's there on the Azov Sea, says we are not going to surrender Mariupol. And the head of the Azov Regiment, Denis Prokorenko, said, I can promise the families of the victims that you will not be ashamed of us, because we are not going to surrender the city. We will fight to the last, and victory will definitely be ours. Now, there was some false media on the Russian side that they had captured the head of the Azov regiment, Denis, and that they brought him into a crowd of Russians who then were beating and spitting on him. But it wasn't him, so it's false information, propaganda. The evacuation convoy left from Mariupol through Berdyansk and through the Zaporozhye region. 2,000 people are being taken out on buses, so they continue to get people out. Thankfully, the green corridors have been a little bit more successful. Again, as Ukrainians push the Russians back, and they are not firing upon those convoys. On the route of the evacuation bus in a specific area, the Russians mined the route with a drone, but the tragedy was avoided because the Ukrainian military was able to take care of it. The soldiers of the Russian Federation released the Melitopol citizens only to Crimea. And this is the mayor there. So what they're saying is, we'll let the people leave Melitopol, but they have to go to Crimea, into the Russian-controlled territories. About 70 to 75,000 citizens remain in Melitopol today, and Russian troops do not allow them to leave the city, going toward Ukrainian-held territories as refugees. Since the start of the Russian military invasion, Russian troops have destroyed at least 6 granaries in eastern Ukraine, and this obviously is going to affect feeding the animals that are providing the meat for Ukraine, but it's also going to affect a lot of different regions, because Ukraine, it wasn't called the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, you know, because it had low amounts of grain. Agriculture was really big here. The president of Tajikistan called 2022 the most difficult year for humanity, and said that every family needs to stock up on food for 2 years. A court here in Ukraine arrested 12 of the AN-124-100 Ruslan transport aircraft of the Russian airliner Volga Dnipro as part of the criminal proceedings initiated on the application of the state enterprise of Anatov. Anatov, I can't say it's a big company. It produces one of the biggest planes in the world, a Ukrainian plane, and so I guess they had built some of these planes for Russia, and so they're being seized. According to a letter from the Dutch government sent to the House of the Representative, Russian assets worth 516 million euros has been frozen in the Netherlands. And this is actually happening in a number of countries. And some of the countries are saying that they're going to be taking that money and giving it to Ukraine or to the countries that have taken the refugees from Ukraine. Operational information from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine states that the Russian Federation continues to conduct a full-scale armed aggression against Ukraine. The enemy continues to carry out a systematic missile, bomb, and airstrike on critical infrastructure facilities, government buildings, and residential areas of Ukrainian cities. The grouping of Russian troops is the units of the Russian troops are regrouping, and it looks like they're probably gonna concentrate their main efforts on conducting an offensive operation in the eastern zone, and I've talked about before along the coastal there to Crimea, because they are really hurting down in Crimea because they don't have any water or electric or gas because Ukraine cut it off when they seized the peninsula, and they've tried to build those bridges across the Kerch Strait, and it's too violent. It keeps tearing it down, so the only way that they can get supplies in there is by plane, by ship all the way around, or that corridor there, which is what they're fighting really hard for, Mariupol, Melitopol. The General Staff also announced the liberation of a number of settlements in the Kiev and Chernihiv regions. I won't list those because you won't know where they are. So that quick update has actually turned into a long update. Forgive me, but there's just so much information to give out, and of course a lot of things that are going on here. So I wish you a good night. I'm going to hit the sack and sleep for just a couple hours, and then I have to go back out to the barn. We are training the piglets to come out of the door that we open now, and once they have that down pat, then I'll start shooing them back through it instead of putting them by hand back into the box. And then once they do that for a day and a half really well, and Mama doesn't sit on them and they learn to get out from underneath her feet, then we won't do anything else and they'll just take care of it on their own. But until then, it's going to be some sleep-deprived days. It's like having babies. So anyway, God bless. Again, thank you for your prayers, for your comments, for your encouragement.